Yo, what's going on YouTube? I'm Sue, and about 2 weeks ago, an upcoming gacha game, ETHERIA Restart, just had its closed beta test. In case you're unfamiliar, this is a game that's similar to games like Summoner's War, as well as Epic 7. Epic 7 being the game that I primarily cover here on this channel, so anything adjacent to it, I'm obviously going to want to give it a try. My hope is that maybe it would have that spark that made Epic 7 such a truly special and amazing game for me. During the beta, I tested as many features as I could. After the beta concluded, I took about a week or so to kind of, reflect on my experiences with the game in its current state and compiled all of my thoughts here in this video review. These are my thoughts on the game in its current form. I hope you enjoy. So let's start this review of ETHERIA Restart with the story, which admittedly is very confusing, so my apologies if I get anything wrong. Essentially, the game is founded on mathematics, something we talk a lot about here on this channel, as most gear grinder gachas require a good grasp of the fundamentals. In the distant future, mathematicians have discovered a new set of numbers that exist between real numbers and imaginary numbers. You know, those numbers you probably learned about in high school or college that are basically negatives inside of square roots. Yeah, those imaginary numbers. The problem is that all real numbers are the ones that aren't imaginary. So I guess mathematicians discovered real numbers again. Whatever. Point is, Earth has apparently gone to hell in a handbasket, and they use these new numbers they discovered to make a digital world kind of like the Matrix called ETHERIA. And since this new digital world is everyone's second chance, ta-da! ETHERIA Restart. You play as a hyperlinker, basically someone who sits in a chair from the Matrix and loads into this digital world and interacts with various other hyperlinkers, as well as AI, which I guess are called animus. Maybe that's hyperlinkers' avatars. Again, it's really confusing. Anyways, the AI inside ETHERIA is being corrupted by these things called Genesis, and it's your job as a hyperlinker, along with essentially the digital world police, to make sure that this corruption doesn't spread and it's eradicated. It's very confusing in how it's presented, and even the premise itself doesn't really make a lot of sense. Honestly, the story in this game barely qualifies as a story. If you come from games like Arknights, Nikke, or Fate Grand Order, I think you will be disappointed. Hell, even other gear grinders in the space such as Epic 7 have a more cohesive story, cast of characters, and world. You can read the story if you want, but honestly, I tuned out about the time when my cyberpunk world became a drab sewer and I was fighting lab technicians instead of random viruses like I was in the game's prologue. Anyways, this leads us in to talk about the game's graphics and user interface. Instead of using hand-drawn sprites like in Epic 7 or Goddess of Victory Nikke, ETHERIA Restart uses 3D models, which is more in line with what you see from most gachas nowadays. It makes sense, right? It keeps the cost down and it's much easier to produce, so I can see why they're going that route. The problem is that the character models in this game are very stiff, very light on details, and are mostly devoid of facial expressions. Speaking of facial expressions, some models don't even have a face, which I'm gonna just chalk up to this being an unfinished beta, but hopefully all of this gets cleared up in the actual release. Lighting and shadows are nearly non-existent in this game, and level design and locations for the most part are incredibly bare bones. There's basically nothing really to explore. It's mostly a straight line, or maybe like a left turn or one simple right turn most of the time. Moving on to the game's menus, it isn't anything you haven't seen before. Like, seriously. The menus in ETHERIA Restart feel almost like they're lifted entirely from games like Arknights or Epic 7. There's nothing in terms of user interface that jumps out from a quality standpoint. While we're talking about quality standpoint and visuals, let's talk about character designs in this game. This is highly subjective, I know, and your preferences may vary, but I feel like the cast of this game falls into two very distinct camps. One, doesn't feel like it belongs in my cyberpunk / digital world gacha game, or two, it's a design you've very much seen before. Let's take, for example, the main heroine, Liane. She's really cool looking for sure, but for those of us who've consumed more anime than we'd like to admit, she looks exactly like a carbon copy of Utena Tenjo from Revolutionary Girl Utena. Chiada, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, this is a stereotypical fox girl / Ojo-sama type that fights with a fan, pretty common in these types of gacha games. Hell Kid literally looks like Sephiroth with red hair, or a character that's straight out of Hellsing. And then we have Heinrich here, who's one of the rarer characters of the game. He just feels like somebody who is cosplaying, Beyond the Grave from Gungrave. We've seen this design a lot. There are a few standouts, though, I feel like, in ETHERIA's cast. Tiamat and Valerian feel like they fit into the digital world aesthetic to a T, and they are some of my favorite looking characters in the entire game. Sonya and her various forms also look really cool, even, again, if I feel like they don't fit the vibe that the game is going for. Yes, they try to explain, why she's in the game. It's kind of shoehorned into the story in, like, the 3rd or 4th chapter. But as I already talked about, the story doesn't really make a lot of sense and is not very good. There are a few standouts here in this game, but nothing on the level of the characters you've come to expect from studios like HoYoverse or Shift Up with their games. Hell, even if you come from Epic 7, which is the primary game that I cover here on the channel, you would be hard-pressed to say that any of ETHERIA's designs compare to even the standard fare from Smilegate's Gacha game. So far in this review, I've been pretty harsh on ETHERIA Restart. That said, there are a few areas where this game really excels, and the sound aspect is one of them. ETHERIA's OST is actually pretty good. It's filled with some catchy electronic beats and pretty epic boss tunes. The music in this game isn't going to blow your socks off like, Yostar does with Arknights or Shift Up with Nikke, but the music is definitely on par with something like Zenless Zone Zero. Additionally, you could tell the developer XD did their homework when it came to supplying the voiceover talent for ETHERIA. The voice acting in this game is incredible. It has some truly amazing voice talent, such as Yui Ishikawa of Nier and Nikke fame as the voice of Lian. Banten's voice actress, being Yukari Tamura, is also a pleasant surprise to me, and the supposed antagonist of the story, being voiced by Junichi Suwabe of Fate and Jujutsu Kaisen fame, also a real treat here. Anyways, let's move on to talk about ETHERIA's core gameplay loop as well as PvE and PvP game modes. Restart is what I would classify as a gear grinder style gacha game, similar to Summoner's War, Outer Plane, Epic 7, and others. The primary purpose of the game is to grind content, to get gear, to strengthen your characters, before eventually taking those very same characters into PvP game modes, which constitutes the game's actual endgame. ETHERIA's character progression systems are actually very good compared to their competitors, and might actually be the best ones in the entire space from what I've seen. In traditional gear grinders, your character can hold up to 6 pieces of equipment, and you want to gear your characters with pieces from the same set in order to take advantage of a set bonus, where 4 pieces of this gear get, for example, bonus attack. Things like that. What makes ETHERIA unique is that the set bonuses in this game are modular, giving you a small bonus for as little as 2 pieces of the same set, while letting you get massive bonuses for stacking up to 6 pieces of the same set. In games like Epic 7, where 4 of your 6 pieces must be the speed set to get any type of bonus, ETHERIA allows you to use as little as 2 for just a small boost of speed, allowing you to dedicate the other 4 to something like a counter-attacking set. This, in the late game, will give you a lot of customization for your characters. They're going to feel more freeform and less restrictive overall, and it's something I really like about this game. Additionally, modules, aka the gear, they don't require any gold to unequip, and you could also save different gear loadouts in this game, which those same loadouts you could port to other characters, mind you. That means you can have your fastest speed set on one character, and then when it's time to farm a different level, you could just take all that gear with the touch of a button and freely move it over to another character. Amazing quality of life feature. The prowess system is a combination of Epic 7's Rune Awakenings as well as skill enhancements. By tying both of these systems together, it actually cuts down on the things you need to farm and level to use a character effectively, which cuts down on some of the bloat in the game, so I'm also thankful for that. Lastly, we have shells, which replace artifacts from a game like Epic 7 or like craft essences from Fate Grand Order, light cones from HSR, whatever your game's equivalent is. Normally, these would be found in the game's gacha, but instead, the developers made them all farmable. This means that when it comes to PvP, you're never going to be locked out of a specific item because it was from, say, like a collab or a limited banner that came out before you even started the game. Everything is neatly there, able to be farmed whenever you need it. My only complaint with shells is that, well, the effects of some of them are truly broken, which is something we'll talk about when we bring up PvP and its balance in just a moment. For now, let's move on to PvE, or I should say lack of PvE. For games like Arknights, Zenless Zone Zero, Epic 7, and more, I found that it would take me a good 15 to maybe 40 hours to clear all the game's PvE content before I needed to actually start grinding, right? You know, the story and things like that. By the end of my first 4-hour stream with ETHERIA, I realized that I would need to grind and background battle just to unlock the next story segment. This meant that a lot of my time with the game on stream was just background battling or AFK farming while I talked to my chat, which honestly is a very glaring problem given that I'm only 5 hours into the game. And yes, this is a closed beta, which means the game's not finished, but it also means that it's showering me with a ton of free materials to help me progress as fast as possible, and I'm still sitting here background battling with nothing really to do just 4 to 5 hours into the game. Even now at level 30 plus, most of the game comprises of things that you've seen before in other gear grinders, and for some reason there's still even less to do than those games. You log in, you farm for gear, you complete dailies until you run out of stamina, and then you log out. There isn't much else to do PvE wise in Restart, right? And I hit all of this within 3 to 4 days of the beta coming out, casually playing it. Many of my other viewers who went hardcore grinding it hit that point even faster. If there is one thing, though, I do want to praise in the PvE section before moving on to PvP, it's this game's guild or union system. This thing is so much better than Epic 7's system. It has an actual world boss that your guildmates can help you fight together instead of just watching a cutscene. That is a welcome addition. Additionally, helping your guildmates acquire dupes for 5 stars of their choice to progress their account instead of just, you know, trading them some random junk hunt materials. That's also a pretty big bonus in my book. Anyways, now let's move on to the big one, PvP, right? Because that is primarily the reason you're going to be playing this game if you were at all interested in it. The game is divided up into Arena and Summit Arena, which isn't too much different than other PvP gachas if you played them. One is a flag arena style game where you fight AI-controlled defenses that are set up by other players by spending flags or tickets each day. You get 5 a day, and if you run out, you need premium currency in order to get more, to be able to fight more, to move your way up the leaderboard. At the end of the week, you get premium currency and other rewards based on your performance and your overall rank. Summit Arena is the real-time arena portion of the game, which is going to be the big draw for this style of genre of gacha. Unlike other games, ETHERIA Restart has no pre-bans as of right now, which gives the first pick an absolutely massive advantage as they get first crack at whatever the most OP unit is on the current patch. After first pick is made, the second player chooses 2 characters before passing back to the first until both players have drafted 5 characters. Then both players may ban one of the 5 drafted, and you fight each other with your remaining 4. Very simple concept, and it is usually very addictive when done well, leading to hundreds of hours of replayability. My problem with PvP, though, is twofold. Number one, since this is a beta, the queues were basically a ghost town, letting viewers stream snipe me, and I kept running into the same players over and over again. But more importantly, number two, I think the game's balance just isn't there when it comes to PvP. Generally, these types of games have a few playstyles. Tank down, for players who want to weather the storm of their opponent's strategy. Control, which seeks to lock players out of the game by stun locking them or just kind of CCing them in general. Aggro, which looks to out-tempo the opponent and win the game very quickly. Or Cleave or Combo, which looks to end the game instantly with one devastating win condition. Currently, as I see it in ETHERIA, only tank down and control really feel possible. Damage dealers simply aren't good enough or don't do enough damage to punch through how tanky most of the bruisers and tanks are in this game. And healers and supports are massively overtuned, I feel like. Characters like Banton give not only an attack buff and critical hit damage buff, but also several revives in their kit and combat readiness pushes out the wazoo. Even the SR supports like Sonya are very strong. She has heals, cleanses, and even a revive. If you played Epic 7 in the early days, she's a better made Chloe, and everyone's going to have access to her. Immunity also seems incredibly good here in this game because surprisingly there's not really anything that buff strips opponents, making barriers and revives just kind of stick around forever. I guess that makes Veronica secretly OP at launch. For as good as all of that is though, there's only a few characters that have those abilities that can cleanse and grant immunity. So if those characters are banned or your opponent just counterpicks and takes them away from you, you just get hit with all the CC heavy characters and your opponent just never lets you play the game. Regardless of which way you choose to play though, where you try to just control your opponent or you just tank through all of their stuff, games are going to take a long time. The long and short of it is that character balance just doesn't really feel like it's here in ETHERIA Restart, at least in the closed beta test. So many of the supports are just way overtuned, feeling like insanely power crept versions of characters that would appear in year 5 or 6 of a gacha game, while the DPS feel generic and underpowered by comparison. Granted, I could be feeling this way because it's a beta in a gear grinder, so there's no way for me to have fully built units with like 100% crit and a ton of crit damage, right? There's just not enough time for me to do that in the 10-day window that this beta test was. It would have felt a lot better if they had just given us a fully decked out account with the complete roster and good gear, if they wanted us to just actually test the real-time arena aspect of this actual game. Look, as much as people on my channel complain about Epic 7's balance, myself included, I don't think ETHERIA Restarts is any better from what I've seen and what I've played. Lastly, I'll just touch on the game's gacha systems. It's pretty similar to Epic 7's or other gacha games in this space. You have regular currency for standard summons and the current rate up banner with a premium currency for light and dark units. Pity is currently 100 summons with no 50-50, which is actually quite good compared to many gacha competitors. Light and Darks being 100 summons for the premium currency, for again a unit with no 50-50, is also a huge change from the 200 needed from this game's competitors. No cool fake outs though in the summoning animations, and the overall summon animations are quite bland in my honest opinion. Not a deal breaker, just I kind of wish I was a bit more excited when I was summoning in this game. Depending on the cost of gacha currency upon full release, I think ETHERIA Restart does a good job with its gacha systems compared to the competitors it has in the gear grinder space. To wrap up the review, the best way I can describe ETHERIA Restart to those of you who have played it is Tower of Fantasy. Tower of Fantasy was designed to be a game similar to Genshin Impact, with many quality of life changes that players of Genshin clamored for. It nailed those little things that players wanted, but almost everything else in the package felt worse overall. Graphics and user interface were a far cry beneath its competitors. Character designs, while cool, weren't anything special or memorable compared to many of its contemporaries. The gameplay was fun when you first started, but as you progressed through it, you started to realize it had a lot of flaws that you could only ever really overcome by spending a lot of money or time on. That's kind of how I feel about ETHERIA Restart. There are amazing ideas here, such as how the game handles modules, shells, gear loadouts, and more. The voice acting is phenomenal, and the game has a great score. But the underlying game doesn't have a lot to do, is very unbalanced, and generally just lacks overall polish. If ETHERIA came out tomorrow, I suspect that many players would drop it within the first month. The general bones and structure of this game are good. It just feels like we rushed everything else and did it as quickly and cheaply as possible. I don't know much about the dev team behind this game and their history, but assuming you're not behind the gun from investors, this definitely feels like a game that you should put back in the oven and polish to a mirror sheen over the next 6 to 12 months. It's simply not time to drop ETHERIA Restart yet. Gacha games are usually defined by their launch period and how well they're doing a month into the game. I don't think ETHERIA has that wow factor to draw in the big crowds, and I don't think it has long-term staying power. If I had to rate the game as it stands now, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. The engines are serviceable, and the potential is there for this game, but it just cuts too many corners, something I don't feel like you can do with a gacha game in 2025. Hoyoverse dominates the gacha space right now. Companies like Yostar and ShiftUp are rising to meet their standard. Hell, even Tower of Fantasy's developers are making Neverness to Everness soon, a game that runs off of Unreal Engine 5. This isn't a niche space anymore. The bar for quality and the money at play here is a far step up from where it was just 4 to 5 years ago. Games like ETHERIA need to rise to meet that, or they're doomed to fade into obscurity. It's the harsh reality of the gacha space in 2025. So yeah, those are my thoughts on ETHERIA Restart. If you played the closed beta, let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'm sure I'll take a lot of heat for my opinions in this video, as I seem to be the outlier on this game when I speak to other content creators. Anyways, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one. Later now.